Hi, and welcome to my first ever YouTube video about the Fuji Instax 6. I bought this camera a few weeks ago to take photos of my neighborhood walks during this COVID-19 pandemic. I wanted to put something out there showing what you can do with the camera, some of its limitations, and to give you some tips. I'm not going to show an unboxing video because there's already a lot of great content out there showing this, and instead I'd rather show you some of the best photos that I've taken, some of the worst photos I've taken, and to go through some of the knowledge I've acquired over the last few weeks. First off, here's a quick look at the camera. It fits pretty nicely in my hand. On the back we have the controls with the LED display. It's just an LED, not an LED display. On the front, the lens, selfie mirror, sensors, shutter button, viewfinder, and flash. It comes with a handy strap, which I find very useful. I also bought this pretty case, but I find this to be less useful, kind of bulky. When the camera is sitting in the case, I can't put my face all the way up to the viewfinder, and it really could do with a pocket to put those photos in. So tip number one, don't buy the case. So my first photo walk around LA, the first thing I noticed was that the colors in the images were pretty good. This was one of the first photos I took of my boyfriend in front of a cactus. You can see the blue of the sky comes out really well. For this photo, I used the darken mode. This uses the standard focal range, which I believe is 2 to 8 meters, 2 to 6 meters, and it decreases the exposure by a couple points. I also took a landscape of a street and found that it came out pretty well. In real life, the mountains in the background were visible, but in the photo that's not the case. For this I used the landscape mode, where the focal range is out to infinity and the exposure is automatic. One thing to note, and this will be my tip number 2, is that automatically in most modes the flash will go off with this camera. So tip 2 is manually turn off the flash, which is this button right here. After this I tried some double exposures, which is one of the main reasons I got this camera. The double exposure, I'm never quite sure what I'm going to get. So I have 2 attempts here. The first one is of a jasmine flower bush overlaid with a pond. And I think this one turned out really well, with the flowers and the ripples in the water overlaying very nicely. I think that it would have been better if I took more water and less wall. My second double exposure was of a cactus and a staircase, as you can see here. One limitation of this camera is that in the double exposure mode, the focal range is limited to the automatic, so that's the 2 to 8 meters. So you can't combine landscape and double exposure, or what I would like to do personally, macro and double exposure. I'll flash up a few pictures that I took with the automatic focusing mode, and these all turned out, I think, quite nicely. In some cases the lighting conditions are not quite what I envisaged, and in other cases the viewfinder was deceptive and a photo which I thought I had squared up very well turned out to be a bit wonky. The double exposure again has some varying results. This one I quite like, with the orange flowers and a silhouette against the bright sky. So that brings me to my tip 3, which is to really experiment with different lighting conditions, different focuses, different settings in the camera, just to get a feel for it, and don't be discouraged when something doesn't turn out exactly how you plan. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about macros because this is something that I found complaints about online quite frequently. When taking a macro with the camera, the viewfinder is not quite perfectly aligned with the lens, and Fuji haven't corrected for this, and so you have to do it yourself. The manual actually mentions this and says to put the circle in the center of the viewfinder at the top right of the center of the object that you're trying to take a picture of, but I find this very tricky to do in real life. I've also found with macros that it's hard to gauge exactly where the focal point is, or what part of the image is going to be in focus. So in this one the leaves are in focus where the flower is not, because I got a little bit too close. I'm not sure if that's a separate tip from the experiment tip, but just something to be aware of. So my final tip is about the flash. The camera comes with 3 fun coloured flash covers, which result in some pretty cool effects. One thing to be aware of is that the flash is not super bright, and so you want to use it in a room with pretty good lighting. Some of the photos I took in a darker room with the flash on turned out pretty dark and underexposed. So there you have it. Those are my tips for the Instax SQ6. One thing you should be aware of is that film is expensive, and if you're like me, you're going to power through a lot of it. So, nonetheless, I highly recommend this camera. I think it's really easy to use. I've really enjoyed the process of taking these pictures, and I think it is well worth the money. Do 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 boop boop pop. Bleep.